It was the ideal evening, with the joyful atmosphere filling everyone's hearts and minds with enough fun to last until their next adventure. The smell of deep-fried food and the cries of hundreds of joyful carnival attendees as they sped through the rides with reckless abandon filled the dusk air. It was the season of carnivals, fairs, and outdoor festivals, and I couldn't help but smile my brightest, widest grin. The sweet scent of cotton candy filled the air like a flash flood, and my bright emerald eyes swept over the crowds, spotting big, overstuffed animals bouncing through them as both adults and children carried their prizes through the fairgrounds. Everyone present tonight had a childlike spirit, including me, as I observed the fun house, one of my favorite carnival attractions. In pursuit of those infamous mirrors and cheap tricks, I trotted excitedly over to the old converted trailer. Since I didn't like riding most of the rides alone, my pals had all gone in search of their favorite greasy fair delicacies, leaving me on my own. I could handle the different mysteries inside the funhouse because they were mostly designed to frighten kids. Most of them I had seen a million times, and at most they made me laugh once or twice. However, it was still a fun house, so I took a few tickets out of my pocket and took inventory as I read the sign outside the old trailer. A young Hispanic man stood by the door, his smile only broken by a sip of his fresh ice-cold lemonade, which he held in his right hand. As people entered, he would nod and smile, then put their tickets in his pocket. There were 5 tickets to enter, and I had precisely 7. Passing the small, light blue squares of paper to the vendor was a lovely way to cap off my wonderful evening at the fair. I cheerfully ascended the steps and entered the enormous, renovated trailer's gloomy interior, pausing briefly to blink a few times to get my eyes used to the new lighting. As I started down the small, dim corridor, I could hear the echoes of the people who had come before me laughing and squealing. I heard a couple up ahead, the woman giggling like a schoolgirl after her boyfriend let out a scared cry. I put my worn baseball cap over my head and was ready to have some fun by myself. I quietly uttered a chuckle. Men usually seem to be the biggest chickens when it comes to these type of thrills. As I rounded the first dark corner, I was met with my first scare. An old prop of a hanging man flew out from the way, its limbs flailing about limply from the sudden jolt that had forced it from its place in the wall. I jumped, my body flooded with an anxious tingling that seemed to dissipate out through my fingers and toes. I chuckled, pushing the dummy aside as I headed further into the funhouse. There was something odd as my fingers had pushed against the prop. It felt slightly warm and gooey. Great effects. Perhaps they'd actually put some effort into things this year. After another couple of feet, a ghastly glowing sheet came flying across the ceiling, accompanied by the familiar ghostly sounds that Halloween had made famous. My green eyes followed the sheet until it disappeared into a back wall. Without a second thought, I made my way further down the hall. Before long, I came to another corridor, my face almost meeting the black wall rather abruptly, if not for my toes hitting the painted cardboard. I briefly blinked and squinted to regain my bearings, because it was very simple to become lost in settings like this. The dark atmosphere and dim illumination made it easier to spook. Before I had time to recover from my encounter with the wall, there was a horrifying shriek, followed by another cheap prop dislodging from the wall. I let out a squeal of surprise, falling back onto the floor as the dummy swung back and forth in front of me. It had several flashing green LED lights scattered around it in odd places. I laughed as I plucked myself back up off the floor. I gave my behind a rub or to my cheeks a little Sore from the tumble, it was nothing big, especially not compared to the thrills I was getting this time around. I started off again, the dummy having the same warm gooey texture as the last. This time, however, my fingers came away wet. I frowned slightly as I wiped them off on my jeans, probably glue from those little dollar store LED lights. Perhaps the vendor could offer me some wet wipes afterwards. It would only be right, since it was their sloppiness that had caused it. There were several more props that dislodged from the dark walls, their little trapdoors squeaking as they popped open to spit out some thrills. Various pained cries, shrieks, and Halloween sound effects echoed through the halls. It was nice to see and feel some effort being put into this carnival classic. After about 5 minutes, I came to a door. My hands found the knob before I even realized what was in front of me. I tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. Frowning, I furrowed my brow in frustration. I took my attention away from the door and felt my way around the hallway around me, running my fingers along the black walls. I couldn't hear any more people in the trailer. They must have all made it out already. I was having a blast, my voice bouncing through the darkness with laughter and squeals, and I hadn't given the grotesque creativity used in the props a second thought. Perhaps it was just jammed halfway through. As I pressed myself against the door, I heard a low, mechanical hum emanating from just behind it. I leaned into the door and wrapped my hands as firmly as possible around the small handle. When I realized the door wouldn't move and that I had taken the wrong turn, I was clearly ready to turn around and shuffle back to find the right path. I paused, pressing my ear to the black entryway and listening intently for any additional sounds. Perhaps it was just the generator outside that powered the entire funhouse. I shrugged it off. My stomach turned up the moment I stepped on something wet on the floor because my mind was racing with possibilities that someone had probably puked in here out of fear or drunkenness. Disgust shot through me, swiftly erasing the joy that had been with me the entire evening. Now that I was paying more attention to my surroundings, I started to notice a smell, not vomit, but a bitter metallic smell from the generator. Bittersweet, I wrinkled my nose before returning down the hallway. Whatever it was, it didn't matter because I had to be near the end by now. I suddenly felt the urge to go find my friends and spend the night at home because my fun had been ruined by someone else's misfortune. At least I wasn't the only one who had dragged my fingers along the walls while wandering down the wrong tunnel. I looked for another passage, and after a second or two, my fingers slid around a corner to my right. I'm not sure how I missed it the first time, but I quickly turned the corner, and as I did, my face struck another prop. With the abrupt jolt, I screamed. As I looked up towards the source of the excitement, a number of LED lights flickered on and off behind it, and my body automatically retreated from whatever it was I had just run into. When I got a good look at the dummy, I was horrified by what I saw in those few brief green flashes with one of those cheap Halloween sound effects blaring in the background. It hung from the ceiling by its neck as I sat on the floor, and as I did, another bright green flash burst behind it, covering nearly every inch of its frame with what appeared to be blood from the chest down into the stomach cavity. The guts looked like fresh sausage and poured out onto the floor. Fearful eyes rolled down towards me, staring straight into my own, and that wasn't stupid. Me completely encompassed by the sudden onset of fear, my body went into overdrive as my limbs began to flail beneath me in an attempt to get up. I began to slip on blood that had pooled on the floor. My heart beat feverishly against the walls of my chest, my breathing flying out of control as I began to drown in my own panic. All those dummies, those props, They were real. I began to whimper as it all began to set in. Digging my heels down into the floor the best I could, I pushed myself back. Crap. Walking back down the corridor in search of an exit, losing track of time, I crawled back frantically through the dark hallway for what seemed like forever until I felt it was safe to turn back around. I wanted out of that freakish house of horrors immediately. This was no fun house. Rolling around onto all fours, I became horribly aware of the racket I was making. How long had I been whimpering? Had someone heard me? Paralyzing fear threatens to break down the door to my subconscious as I crawled on all fours back the way I came. I needed to get out of here immediately. Whoever was killing these people might still be in there, and I didn't want to meet them. At long last I saw a brightening of the black heavy-duty cardboard walls of the funhouse. I gasped a sigh of relief, hot tears beginning to pour down my face as I hurried towards the exit. Sunlight became more apparent as I crawled its weak last rays, fighting for its life against the twilight. There was shuffling behind me now in the corridor and a low scraping sound. I whimpered loudly, my voice. I finally made it to the doorway from where I had entered, jagged with sheer dread. I threw my hands out of the door, curling my fingers around the jamb to propel myself forward and down the steps as my body slid out onto the lawn with a loud noise. When I heard a cry of frustration coming from inside the trailer, I wasted no time in rolling onto my stomach and forcing myself to stand up again. My emerald eyes rolled along the crowd, their terrified faces staring at me as I rose to my full height. I didn't wait, I didn't stop crying, and I pushed through the crowd, leaving bloody handprints on t-shirts and bare shoulders. I wanted to leave right away, and when I eventually located my friends, they all gathered around me to try to soothe my shaking body. By that time, security had already been notified that I was sobbing uncontrollably, leaving streaks of salty tears in the bright red blood from the funhouse. It didn't take them long to locate me. They stormed the funhouse and swiftly found the grisly remains of 11 people. The culprit had not yet been apprehended, but they were searching the grounds while they interrogated me. I only partially listened as the hundreds of individuals and their enormous stuffed animals startled me. Any one of them could have been the one responsible.